Hi everyone, I'm Keith DeStone and I'm here again with Greg Nagy and Sarah and Hélène and Lenny and Claudia this time. And we're here to talk about heroes. So Greg, I just want to immediately turn it over to you. Let's go.
So, this is one of the favorite parts for me of our, shall we say, traveling through the Iliad and the Odyssey. Um, and uh, Lately, I figured out that the best way for me to introduce um, the Odyssey to just anybody out there is to start with the so-called last book of the Odyssey, which is Odyssey 24. And in classical continuum, um, the title for what we're talking about will be ancient Greek hero in 24 hours, et cetera, et cetera. And it'll say hour 9, and it'll say part 1, because then what I want to do later on is be more normal and try to introduce the Odyssey again by starting with Odyssey, quote unquote, book 1, um, instead of starting with Odyssey, quote unquote, book 24, which is what I'm doing today. So why is Greg making this experiment? It all has to do with something that Lenny and I have been struggling with for maybe as many as 3 years, dear Lenny, which
Yeah.
is which is how to contribute to something that editors of a printed version of commentaries on the Iliad and the Odyssey were doing. And Lenny was commissioned to do Odyssey 15, and I was commissioned to do, quote unquote, do Odyssey 24. And the more I thought about Odyssey 24, the more I thought, wow, this really gives me a chance to introduce the Odyssey for people who have just finished reading the Iliad. And bingo, suddenly it all came together for me that the way the editors of the Homeric Iliad and the Homeric Odyssey would be worried about where does the Odyssey end. And some of the best editors, um, two from the Library of Alexandria, thought, well, it should be right after Odysseus kills the suitors who were trying to take Penelope away from being the queen who's married to the king Odysseus. Did I say that in a polite way? And so he kills the suitors. And so these editors in Alexandria, and I'll just give them their names, Aristarchus in the middle of the 5th century BCE, and slightly earlier, his predecessor, Aristophanes of Byzantium. These editors thought that in terms of what Homer supposedly actually composed himself, would end at after the suitors are killed in Odyssey 23. But what about Odyssey 24? What about it? Well, there are all sorts of things going on in Odyssey 24. And the more I thought about it, wow, it's not only, in a way, a retrospective for those who have just finished going through Odyssey 1 through 24, or they're approaching 24, but also people who have finished going through Iliad 1 through 24. There are three major scenes in Odyssey 24. And as you all know by now, I prefer to say not book 24, not even scroll 24, but rhapsody 24, because the 24 performance units of the Iliad and the 24 performance units of the Odyssey are really, uh, as I just referred to them, um, compositions that are performed and reperformed even in the process of composition. If we think of oral poetics the way Albert Lord used to think of oral poetics. So scenario 1 is where the psūkhē, I won't say souls, the psūkhē, let's call them the disembodied conveyors of identity after death. The psūkhē of the suitors of Penelope, who have just been dispatched by Odysseus, make their way into Hades with the guidance of Hermes, the god of mediating between all opposites of the universe, including the opposites of life and death, including the opposites of light and darkness. And there's Hermes conducting the psūkhē, and I'm not going to say souls, of the suitors, and they're entering Hades. And they've just passed the various boundaries that you can imagine that separate the realm of the dead from the realm of the living. And I won't, shall we say, bedevil you with four of those boundaries. I'll concentrate on only one of them, which is the most conventional way of imagining what separates the realm of the living from the realm of the dead, and that is the freshwater river Okeanos. The freshwater river Okeanos, which separates the world of light from the world of darkness. And it's a freshwater stream that keeps replenishing itself because it's circular. And why not if shall we say, our Earth is imagined as a disk that is surrounded by a freshwater river that is self-replenishing. Anyway, there they are. They've just come to Hades. And who should be in Hades at this point? But, and this is what the focus of Odyssey 24 is when we begin this performance unit, is the psūkhē of Agamemnon and the psūkhē of Achilles. And what gets me is you would expect the psūkhē of Agamemnon, who is not somebody who's freshly killed. He's been killed some time ago, thanks to Aegisthus and shall we say, I can't say ex-wife, but the wife, Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra enables Aegisthus, who is now her lover, to kill Agamemnon after he makes it back safely from Troy. And so you would think, wow, Agamemnon was killed by Aegisthus, along with his companions when he finally made it back home to, shall we say, near Mycenae, but not yet in Mycenae. And so you would think, well, maybe Agamemnon should start talking, or I better say it this way, the psūkhē of Agamemnon should start talking to the psūkhē, that's the plural of psūkhē, of the suitor, saying, okay, so why are you people down here? I and my people were ambushed and slaughtered some time ago. You're freshly ambushed and slaughtered. But no.
Being brought by Hermes, yeah.
Yes. And
yeah.
But instead of that, there's a dialogue between the psūkhē of Achilles and the psūkhē of Agamemnon. And I just love the fact that I say that the psūkhē is the disembodied conveyor of identity after death. Well, that means that they are identities, even though they might be bereft of some of the mental and emotional powers that they had when they were truly alive. But in the grammar of what Milman Parry and Albert Lord used to call Homeric diction, that is to say, the formulaic system of Homeric poetry, I love the fact that psūkhē is a feminine noun. So in some situations, the formulaic system simply says, the psūkhē of Agamemnon said this, the psūkhē of Achilles says that. But other times, if you're just referring to the speaker, you revert back to a masculine um, third person singular pronoun. Wow. We can talk about that forever, but I'm almost finished with what I hope is simply um, my rationale for why I'm doing this. And then I hope that my wonderful dialogic partners, whom I've so far not given a chance to say anything, so that'll change in a couple of minutes, how we will really try to flesh this out and what it means. But could I just say that basically Achilles says, or should I say the psūkhē of Achilles says, well, it's too bad what happened to you, Agamemnon. And Achilles, or Achilles' psūkhē, if you like, is not gloating. He's just saying, it's too bad. And then Agamemnon does this riff where he says, well, you're so fortunate, Achilles, because it would have been better for me to die at Troy rather than come home safely to the Greek-speaking world in Mycenae, etc. Because look what happened to me because of my unfaithful wife. And so this is a real sob story. My unfaithful wife, etc. I got ambushed. You're lucky, or I shouldn't say lucky, you're blessed that you died in Troy and that you had a funeral there, you had you had a tomb, and then next thing you know, there's the most beautiful description of the funeral of Achilles and the tomb of Achilles. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the only place in Homeric poetry in all 48 rhapsodies where we find out what the number one warrior quality of Achilles is, because we didn't really get to see it in the Iliad. He was too busy sitting it out for so long in the Iliad, which is he is the master charioteer. There's no better charioteer among the Achaeans. The second best is Patroclus. And in fact, Patroclus really dies in the role of a charioteer, and Hector kills Patroclus in the role of a charioteer. But I love the way Agamemnon says, oh, there you were, Achilles. You were lying there dead with dust swirling around your body, and you were so huge. And you were lying there so hugely. Queso, you lay there, megas megalosti, you lay there huge, in a huge way. And I love that because this is such an explicit way of referring to that other dimension of ancient Greek heroes, which is that they were worshipped in a kind of stylized way as if they were stylized ancestors, or as I like to say, in hero cult. They were cult heroes. And cult heroes, when they're represented, for example, in the visual arts, they're always larger than life. So here's Achilles dead, and he's huge, and he is he is he's just lying there hugely. And then it says lelasmenos hyposunaon, having been disconnected mentally from your feats as a chariot warrior. Wow. So in a way, anything that the Iliad didn't get around to saying, Odyssey 24 says, and that's a perfect example. So there's this dialogue between Achilles and Agamemnon, or if you like, between the disembodied conveyors of the identities of Achilles and Agamemnon. But how this compares, already we're now the 48th performance unit, if you count the Iliad and the Odyssey together. And if you go all the way back to the very first performance unit, what classicists call scroll one or book one of the Iliad, there's this intense quarreling. And it's just so visceral that it makes you uncomfortable. It makes you queasy between Agamemnon and Achilles, the way Agamemnon insults Achilles. Well, Achilles had already insulted Agamemnon, but I think Agamemnon deserved it, but that's another matter. But I'm saying here in Odyssey 24, that is to say, in the 48th performance unit of the Iliad and the Odyssey combined, there's a kind of eerie serenity to how these two heroes who were really going at it in, in Iliad 1, here in Odyssey 24, it's so retrospective and so almost calm, not just serene. And then just maybe one extra minute I'll take up for scenario 2 and then scenario 3 so that we have time to have more of a discussion. Again, sorry for the monologue. And that's in scenario 2 is where we really get down to how the Odyssey um, makes it possible for Odysseus to be a rival of Achilles himself um, by way of the Odyssey as compared to the Iliad. So the second set of 24 performances, that is to say the Odyssey versus the first set of 24 performances. So in a sense, what I'm saying is scenario 2 is kind of catching up with all the Odyssey. So it's a retrospective of the whole Odyssey. And then in scenario 3, and I'm almost done, it's the reunion of Odysseus and his father Laertes. And why that is important is that the mutual recognition of father and son is a recognition of ancestors with the current descendant of all the ancestors, who's Odysseus. So it's a beautiful genealogical connecting of everything with everything. And it's all done in terms of testing not just perception, not just morality, but emotions. Just gorgeous. So I love Odyssey 24, and it may not be, shall we say, the ending of the Odyssey, but it's the ending of the Iliad and Odyssey together. So that's my shot at it. I'm sorry that took almost half an hour, but now I
So
want to be silent.
isn't it also true, Greg, that you personally, this is a biographical thing, but it's neat that it's the first Homer book that you read, right? Way
Yes,
back when you were a
yes,
green graduate student, right?
yes. And I was so green, dear Lenny. So this was, do you mind a grandpa story here?
Yeah,
So
tell us a grandpa story.
but I can do it in a compressed way. So I want you all to imagine 1962. That's when I started graduate school at Harvard, and I had gone to a humongous state university, Indiana University, where I really think I got my best education. I loved what I learned at Indiana University, and there was one favorite professor who was a professor ambidextrous of both linguistics and classics. And he was really good at both. His name was Fred Householder. And, and so when I was an undergraduate, I was more of a linguist than a classicist because I just liked the linguistic side of Mr. Householder even more than the classic side. So I was just so naive about everything. And in fact, it was my professors who chose Harvard as the place where I should apply primarily for graduate school. And I was lucky enough to get in. And then I had a meeting with the professor who was at that point the advisor for incoming PhD students. And that was Eric Havelock. And he said, well, young man, let's see what kind of courses you want to take now that you're at Harvard. And I said, oh, is it okay if I take the #1 bus on Massachusetts Avenue and go to MIT every day because I want to take a course with Roman Jakobson, the great Prague school linguist, who at that point was still a professor at MIT. And I would love to take courses with Noam Chomsky. And he said, well, maybe we can arrange this, but that means that you're sacrificing Greek courses that you might be taking. How good is your Greek? He says. He says, how many tragedies have you read? Oh, I've read the Agamemnon of Aeschylus. Oh, for you, any other tragedies? No, sir. Okay. Have you read any Homer? Have you read Iliad or Odyssey? No, sir, not one bit. I had no Homer. How about the orators? Have you read any of the orators? No, I haven't. Well, what have you read? I said, oh, I've read Marriage Contracts and Papyri, and I read the erotic novel Daphnis and Chloe by Longus, 2nd century CE. Well, at that point, things like that weren't even on the reading list. So, so he said, well, I'm going to assign you to remedial reading. And my lucky stroke was that he assigned me to John H. Finley Jr., who was, I think, my favorite professor at Harvard. Lenny, am I forgetting anybody? I don't think so.
No, he was it. Yep.
He was just so wonderful. And so I had a one-on-one for college students, it would be called a tutorial. And he said, I'll tell you what, why don't we read the first 200 plus lines of Odyssey 24? And so we just read what the first part that I just summarized. And I thought, where's this been all my life? And so that's how I started Homeric studies, as Lenny knows even better than I do at this point. and I've just never been the same ever since. And by the way, when we finished that, he said, well, let's see, what else should we do? How about Theognis of Megara? He, he was certainly the first attested poet who really talks about moral nobility as opposed to socioeconomic nobility. And wow, as Lenny knows better at this point than I, because we've been through so much together, Lenny and I, that too changed my life. So Finley, I owe everything to at Harvard, except that then after I was already a junior faculty, Albert Lord became my mentor. I didn't really, I knew him before, but he's the other favorite professor, except I never took courses from him. Okay, that's Grandpa's story. That took only 5 minutes. That's pretty good, considering, I mean, Lenny knows I have a 2-hour version of this.
Yeah. But I mean, the wonderful thing is that it looks like you can't end the Odyssey without also talking about the end of the Iliad, right?
Exactly.
It's a kind of closure
Yeah.
phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yes. Oh,
it's so amazing. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
these are not two separate poems, okay? They're one big whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful web. And by
Yeah.
web, I mean not just World Wide Web, although you can think of it that way, World Wide Web, but I mean web as the masterpiece of a master weaver.
I am just thinking about the way that the end of the Odyssey really surfaces things about cult heroes that
Yes.
you don't see in other places. So it's so interesting to start there. And so I'm actually really fascinated. I had never heard this story, Greg, of you starting with Odyssey 24. So, I mean, were you seeing it right away? Were you
No,
talking about that right away?
no,
Okay.
no. I thought, wow, these characters are great. I was so naive about what Homeric poetry is. I just
Yeah.
had never been exposed to it. My only
Oh,
excuse is
so
I was young and I really loved linguistics, and I was collecting languages left and right, so to speak. But
mm,
but content, no, no, I didn't
fascinating.
understand anything. I just loved it. That's all.
So cool.
One of the things I was noticing a little bit when you were talking about this episode in the Odyssey is not only that reference back to the Iliad, but also to the opening of the Odyssey.
Yes.
Because we've got Hermes, who is the other character who is described as Odysseus is, as Polytropos. And we have, there was something else, the suitors, and they're mentioned right at the beginning as well. And Aegisthus, you were talking about, and he's mentioned right in the opening of the Odyssey as another example compared to the suitors, equally
Beautiful. Yes. What
I,
a web. Lenny, you were about to say.
no, I mean Hermes is exercising the function of being the person who brings people back down to the underworld, and and he that's also what Odysseus's trajectory was too, right? He went to the underworld and came back. So it's a reprise in a certain sense of his journey earlier in the poem, right? So the linkage that Sarah's talking about is very real and substantive. Yeah.
And you know, dear Sarah, another thing that's relevant is that in Ancient Greek Heroes book, both the one that's the 24-hour book, but also that newer effort called Ancient Greek Heroes Athletes Poetry, um, I talk a lot about, shall we say, the unfinished business of what's happening as you go through the plot of the Iliad and Odyssey, and what Lenny is saying about the connectedness of everything, and what you, dear Sarah, have just mentioned about those amazing, shall we say, cross references, all the way back to, for example, Odyssey 1 and so on and so forth. And it just makes me think of other things that are relevant when we think of oral poetics, and also when we think about hero cults. So every time, not every time, but at a very important moment, when the psūkhē of Agamemnon addresses the psūkhē of Achilles, he actually calls him olbios. And olbios, as I emphasize in those two books that I was plugging, in hero cult means blessed in the sense of somebody who has achieved the status of a cult hero, who is worshipped in hero cult, who is worshipped as a stylized ancestor, so to speak, from the heroic age, olbios. But superficially, olbios just means somebody who is fortunate, usually by way of wealth, which is okay. Hero cults are all about how you have material security if you worship heroes the right way. So it's not that they're not connected to wealth, but it's transcendent. It's transcendent. And then weird thing is that, and this is where, in a sense, the Odyssey goes beyond the Odyssey, Sarah, is that then he does, the psūkhē of Agamemnon does what rhetoricians would call an apostrophe, an addressing of somebody who isn't there. Odysseus isn't there in 24 because now he's king. He's not visiting Hades anymore as he was in Odyssey 11. And Agamemnon says, wow, Odysseus, you are olbios because you have a wife who made it possible for you to regain your kingship. Without Penelope, it wouldn't have happened. And look at me, I lost my kingship because my wife betrayed me. And again, sob story, in many ways he deserves it. But I'm saying what you see there is, well, is it okay to call Odysseus olbios, even as in an apostrophe, if Odysseus is still alive? No, it isn't. As we know from Herodotus, where you have these wonderful sayings, call no person olbios until they're dead. That doesn't mean, you know, gee, you're not fortunate until you die because, oh, life is so horrible that you're just put out of misery. That a lot of classicists think that's what it means. No, what it means is don't call somebody a cult hero before they're dead. And there, it's kind of dangerous that Odysseus is addressed as olbios, even in an apostrophe, because hello, he's still alive. He's still up there.
Mm.
I like what you say, Greg, about Odysseus not being there. It makes me think of a point that you make about the relationship between the Iliad and the Odyssey through the character of Odysseus, which is he has to get over the Iliad in order to have the Odyssey. And when this Iliadic voice comes back, these two voices, though Agamemnon's, of course, persists a bit into the homecoming stage of things, those Iliadic voices, which are looking back on the Iliad,
Wow.
Odysseus is not talking to them, and they address him from a distance. Agamemnon's psūkhē addresses him from a distance, and
Beautiful.
this
Beautiful.
this helps solve what was a problem for me about Telemachus. Telemachus's mission in life in the Odyssey, according to Athena, which she helped him with, was to connect with Odysseus. So why in Odyssey 4 does he remain disconnected from stories about his father?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
those stories, it turns out, are stories about Troy, about Iliadic themes.
Yes.
So the
Yes.
book finds a way for Telemachus not to get emotionally involved in stories about Odysseus at Troy. But when there's a story about Odysseus coming home, that's when Telemachus and everyone else starts to cry, starts to weep at the table.
Wow. And wasn't it wonderful the way Casey the other day talked about grief? I think she really nailed it when she talked about what happens after Iliad 16 and you go into 17, and by that time everybody is grieving and they know that Achilles will die, and so everybody is already in lament mode. And as Casey was saying, and I just love the way she said it, so I won't be able to replicate. But somehow Achilles is saying to everybody, I know I'm going to die, so I'm grieving even more than you are. And then he laments himself like a woman. Well, he laments Patroclus, but that's lamenting yourself. And Keith, what you just said reminds me of a brilliant essay you once published where you use the term getting over it, which I think is so perceptive, so intuitive. But I can't remember whether you published it in classical.
I need to republish it and continue.
Yes.
I have a few more things to add to that. So that's
So you heard everybody what Keith just promised. This is upcoming in classical continuum. And while I'm nagging people, what Lenny has produced as a commentary on Odyssey 15 is a masterpiece. And then Lenny, you could also tell about the missing piece, which is the Doug essay.
Yes.
So talk about it a little bit, because really you should why don't you republish your commentary on?
It is already in classical continuum, I
Yes,
think.
but I would like to see it updated so that
Okay.
who are listening to us now can then
Okay.
look at the September 25 or 26 version. If you make it 26, that would be even better.
All right. Okay. I'll see what I can do. But yeah, I mean, I just I did want to say something about the what happens with these two heroes and the Nostos part of it, okay?
Yeah,
Which is
please
that
talk
one of the I mean, it's obvious that you start with the souls of the dead going down into the underworld, right? They're not coming back, okay? Odysseus is the only person who's done that, right? And what you say, what the Odyssey says about Agamemnon is that he died en nosto in his nostos. It's
Yes.
not literally he never really finished it, okay? And then Achilles obviously is the one who opted for the kleos instead of the nostos, right? So you have a kind of structural you know a lexicon of what different things took place and how this affects these people, and the fact that I mean it's important to think that I said that the story about the recounting of the funeral of Achilles is a way of ending the Iliad, but the Iliad never talks about Achilles dying. It only talks about Patroclus. But the lamenting that you were just talking about makes it so clear that
Yes.
this is the underlying thing, and that in the Odyssey part here, it really comes to the surface in a remarkably powerful way. Yeah,
Beautiful. Wow.
yeah.
There's another thing that I was noticing. You were talking about that passage where Achilles lying dead, huge in his hugeness. And I was reminded of in Iliad, I forget which, I think it's 22, 23, where the dark cloud of grief fell upon Achilles when he hears about the death of Achilles.
Yes.
And he's on the ground and he's covering himself with dust,
Yes.
huge and
Yeah.
hugely at full length. And
Yeah.
the two passages seem very similar to me. I
It's
haven't
the
looked at
same.
the Greek, but
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I so agree. Yeah, and they're not only larger than life, but then if you fast forward to Herodotus when he's talking about cult heroes, I love that anecdote where the Spartans want to kidnap the corpse of Orestes, and it turns out that um, um, the corpse is shall we say hidden away in a city in Arcadia, and the Spartans managed to kidnap the corpse, but the corpse is described as I forget how many cubits long, and by the way, in Lycophron, leave it to Lycophron, this late author, he measures the length of the dead Achilles as 9 cubits. So that's from your elbow to the tip of your middle finger.
Yeah.
9 times that is how how tall, except he's horizontally tall, Achilles is in death. And then you know that wonderful painting on the two handles, at the two handles of the Francois vase, that early vase or vase, um, in Ajax is hefting the corpse of Achilles. And Ajax, we know, is the tallest warrior in the Iliad. But even this towering hero is dwarfed by the corpse of Achilles that is draped over his shoulder. Wow.
Yeah,
Um,
if I may, I thought of something also in Iliad 24. Okay, you have Priam, and you have you have a grieving father, and in Rhapsody 24 of the Odyssey, Odysseus is going to have to do something about the grieving fathers of the suitors.
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah,
Oh
so
my God, yes.
yeah,
And you know, dear Hélène, I think going back to the third of the three amigos, there's Doug, Greg, and Lenny. I'm doing them in sequence of age, and 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 Doug has this amazing thing about exactly what you pinpointed, and I'm so glad you did. Um, uh, Doug can, well, let's start over. Doug can prove that an earlier version of the Odyssey, when it was still evolving in Asia Minor, in the context of the 12-city federation, in that earlier version, instead of Athena, it was Apollo who sort of puts everything back together again. In the version that we have, which is via Athenian transmission, and I'm so glad you mentioned this, dear Hélène, who is the person who stops the feuding, which is potentially going to be ongoing and extending from the heroic age into the present? Well, it is none other than Athena. And Athena has
indeed.
the feuding will stop now. And the closest thing I can get to that is what Athena does at the end of the three tragedies that we sometimes miss. It's a misnomer. Sometimes we call the Oresteia trilogy. Well, in the three dramas that culminate in the Eumenides, what's happening? It's Athena who says, no more vendettas. And that's what the Odyssey is already saying. So in a way, it's an Athenian precursor, if I can put it that way, of what Aeschylus, who some people think that Sophocles is closer to Homeric poetry. I still think it's Aeschylus. Um, I frankly think that in Aeschylus's time, people lost their attention span to shall we say, experience 15 12,000 plus verses of the Iliad and 12,000 plus verses of the Odyssey. No, now it's tragedy, which is, how shall I put it? It's more compressed with regard to attention span. But you see what I'm saying, dear Hélène, what you intuited here is exactly how, in a sense, the ending of the Odyssey is a precursor of the ending of the three tragedies, that is to say, in the humanities of Aeschylus. Yes,
Yeah, I totally agree. That's the way I feel also. Yeah,
I love it. That's
thank
beautiful.
you. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, and I was just wondering, maybe Lenny had some thoughts too, as we're making this transition from reading the Iliad to reading the Odyssey. So, you know, we've kind of been immersing ourselves in the end of the Odyssey now, and now folks will take that knowledge and go into the beginning of the Odyssey. And what's so cool about that is, you know, audiences, I don't know, like, can you even imagine an audience steeped in oral tradition understanding like their quote unquote first time hearing the Odyssey? I don't even know if that's a relevant conversation. So I think it's kind of cool to know, to really be thinking about the ending and the whole vision as you go into the Rhapsody 1 of the Odyssey. What are you thinking, Lenny, people might want to be thinking about, or what's the challenge?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that you know, and just as striking as it is that the Odyssey ends with this kind of massive look back at the Iliad and its themes, and it closes itself as well. So it's also striking that the Odyssey, although it literally starts with Odysseus, it really starts with his son, this kid, right? And you don't get to him; he gets postponed, okay, for you know a long time, and. So why is it that you start out with the kid at the beginning of the story, and why is that an important part of the you know important place for the narrative to begin? Um,
Mhm.
it, Greg, do you have
I
thoughts
mean,
about that?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do, dear Lenny.
Yeah,
You know, we were talking about the three amigos, but why don't we say that Doug and I and Lenny are the three musketeers? So then, who is another male humorist who is a D'Artagnan, and that's Richard P. Martin. And Richard P. Martin has this amazing article that first appeared in CQ. Everybody thinks it's Classical Quarterly, but it's Colby Quarterly. And
yeah,
so, unfortunately, most classicists didn't read it, and they should have. But then now, Richard Martin's articles are collected in a wonderful book that is edited by Lenny and myself and Laura Slatkin, who is the fifth musketeer. And but you know, French novelists wouldn't know how to handle a female musketeer. But anyway, Lenny and Laura and I have edited this book, which I like to call Richard Martin's greatest hits, but it has to do with Telemachus. And for him, Telemachus is a hero who is who has missed the boat. He is post-heroic age. Because you look at his contemporaries like Pisistratus, the charioteer in Odyssey 4. Pisistratus is just a post-heroic placeholder for historical people who trace themselves back to heroes.
mhm,
And by the way, that makes Orestes post-heroic too. You know, he has great potential, but there's no Trojan War to show off anymore, your heroic prowess. There's certainly no Theban, seven against Thebes. So it's post-heroic. I think, dear Lenny, that's what D'Artagnan, aka Richard P. Martin, would say.
yeah.
Beautiful,
Uh,
beautiful.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. But and it's also, but it's like they're they're post-heroic, so they're closer to us in a certain way, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're closer to the audience. The heroes themselves are a big remove from our world, but
Oh,
these
God.
kids are much. So that's why I think you want to start there because this
mhm.
they're more relatable somehow. right?
Oh yeah. Oh, I so
So they're
agree.
trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure
Yeah.
it out, and they're trying to figure out their connection to the story, just like the audience is doing that as well. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yes, it's a process of connection. I think that's the perfect
Yeah.
thing, right? Because
Yes.
that's a key word for Telemachus, right? He's got
Yes.
to get over being nepios, right?
Yes.
Disconnected.
Mm, mm,
And it's kind of sad, isn't it, that when the grandfather and father and son all get together and slay the suitors, you know, in other kinds of epic tradition, Telemachus should be the how shall I say it, the champion of the story, but he isn't. He
No.
keeps getting overshadowed by his father. And then for poor Orestes, I mean, what heroic deed does he have in terms of battle prowess? Well, he just kills his mom.
Yeah.
I mean,
mm.
it's so sad. And let's not get into, oh, why did I kill my mother? Because that's for another meeting of our group here.
Mm. Uh, we only have a couple minutes left, but I'm curious if you would talk a little bit more about the antagonism. So are you saying that there is antagonism then between the audience and the heroes at some level? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I want to hear, Lenny should have the last word on this, but
No, no,
I
you
do
should
the
have it.
next to last word, which is that in my old age, I finally figured out that all the dysfunctionalities that you see on the part of gods, even in the heroic age, they kind of cease to be in the age when you and I, Claudia, as Athenians in the 5th century BCE, let's pretend we're Athenians in the 5th century, the golden
Yeah,
age.
yeah,
But
yeah,
by
yeah.
that time, the Olympian gods, they don't do bad things anymore. And for
Sure,
that
sure.
matter, you see
I
what
mean, I
I'm
feel like that's
saying?
yeah, when you've talked about in the past, like the dysfunction of the time of heroes versus
Exactly.
the functionality and the symbiosis during times of ritual. But I guess, yeah, I guess this conversation just making me think about, I don't really have a formed thought. I guess I'm just trying to understand now. I never really thought about a sense of antagonism between an audience member and
Yes.
a hero. But I hear what you're saying. Maybe, so are you saying it's outside of that because we're outside of it and there is no antagonism? Like I mean, I'm thinking about this line in is it Thucydides? I'm gonna mess this up. I think it's Thucydides in the funeral oration where they kind of say like you're not gonna be able to compete with these dead people, right? Am I
Yeah,
remembering this correctly?
yeah, and not just there, but all over the place. Exactly. Can you top this? No, you can't. But at least we now have a well-ordered cosmos.
That's
And,
right. That's right.
that doesn't mean that the gods are going to listen to all our prayers. And I think maybe Lenny is Mr. Prayer, because,
Mm,
Lenny's book on prayers is still the North Star, the gold
mm.
standard for how to think of that. So Lenny, could you do, maybe this would be a perfect way to bring this to a full circle, if you could talk a little bit about prayer, connection with the cosmos, euchomai.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of prayer is based on the concept of reciprocity in a fundamental way, and so the basic idea is when you pray to a god, you're engaging in a reciprocal exchange with a god, which obliges you're obliged to do it, but they're obliged to respond. So there's this
Mm,
gulf implicitly between you and them that words are able to bridge in some way, as well as ritual actions that you promise to do in a prayer. So there's this fundamental, the universe for Greeks is divided between gods and mortal men and animals, right? And you have these rituals that explain and structure the relationship between these wholes. Um, and then you also have engraved in the sacrificial ritual a kind of history of cooking, which is about civilization too. So as time goes on, human beings become more moral, less uncontrollable, more like us, and the burden on us is to lead lives that are avoid hubris and enshrine decay, and we follow the rules of the works and days, and we try to lead our lives in appropriate ways. The heroes are examples for us, both positive and negative, not in simple ways of how to live. Okay, so our even Telemachus as a kid he's not in the heroic mold, but he's got limits, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
And that's the thing that the Achilles and the Odysseus people are learning about, so to speak, and generating for us. So it's all about a kind of inscription, a mythological kind of history of the universe, right? And that comes down to us. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Beautiful.
Thank you. All right, friends. It is time for us to close out the session. So I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thanks to everyone who's following along on the internet. We're delighted that you're joining our conversations. And until next time.
Till the next time.